Hey guys, real quick, I just wanted to take a quick second to tell you about the show's awesome sponsor, Anchor. Back in 2019, when I started this podcast, I didn't know much about podcasting at all. Luckily, I came across Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free, it has built-in creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can also be heard on all the major platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started now.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 805 Uncensored Podcast. It's episode number 51, and today we're going to be talking about Anarcho-Capitalism. If it's your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. If you've been here before, thanks so much for supporting the show. And today I got two wonderful guests on here. I've got the producer of the show, Cmoney. How you doing, man?
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Then I've also got Erika from the Cocktails Capitalism Podcast.
Hey, Jordan. So good to see ya.
Yeah, so good to see you as well. It's her first time on the show, and she's definitely going to be a regular on here.
Oh, yeah.
See, how about you dive a little bit into your politics and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? And then, Erika, you can do the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, my name's Cmoney Burns. I mix and master podcasts, do some podcast production. Have a little sister podcast to this one called Trickle Down Socialism. I also mix and master rap records, and I'm a touring musician. As far as my politics go, I don't like to get super hyphenated or into like competing schools of thought. I'd consider myself broadly on the left, broadly a proponent of leftist social and economic aims. If I had to get close to any tendency, I'd probably say like anarcho-communism, libertarian socialism, somewhere in that area. But definitely like my economic tendencies are towards Marxist economic analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
Cool. That's awesome. All right. Should I jump in here?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Erika Lehman. I am the host of the Cocktails Capitalism Podcast, which is basically a show that uses storytelling to kind of shine light on different problems in our capitalist world. And I am heavily influenced by Marx. I love everything that he wrote. I love critiques of capitalism is kind of my strength. Not so much the actual solutions or the positive vision for what alternatives we should adopt and dive into. Like I find myself kind of going between democratic socialism, anarcho-communism, pure anarchy. I feel like I am constantly like playing with these ideas, but I don't really like to identify strongly one way with one political ideology. Most of my political grounding is in critiques of what presently exists. So I'm really excited about this conversation because I think it's going to help to clarify some of my own views. You guys are so much deeper into anarchism than I am. So I'll definitely have some questions for you guys.
Well, great. Thanks so much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we should start by talking about anarcho. The word anarcho is a prefix, it's a Greek prefix, and it means absence of a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also important to talk about the word anarcho because it's a prefix that's used to distinguish the differences between various schools of anarchist thought. So there's different types of anarchists, as we've already kind of talked about in the episode. There's like anarcho-communists, there's anarcho-capitalists, which is not a thing at all, which we'll get to. There's anarcho-primitivism, etc. And then capitalism is an economic system that can be characterized as one that supports the private ownership of the means of production, supposedly free markets.
Mm-hmm.
Voluntary exchange is what they say, and wage labor. So, C-Money, you're really well versed on anarcho-capitalism and the thinkers behind it. Can you talk about what exactly anarcho-capitalism is and where does this originate from?
Yeah, I mean, I'd start with kind of like a broad definition of anarcho-capitalism, probably just like the Wikipedia definition, which is anarcho-capitalism is a political philosophy that advocates the elimination of centralized states in favor of a system of private property enforced by private agencies, free markets, and the right libertarian interpretation of self-ownership, which extends the concept to include the control of private property as part of the self. I would say that anarcho-capitalism developed as kind of a reaction to interventionist and redistributive economic and social policies that were themselves a response to the ravages of the Gilded Age of laissez-faire capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like early anarcho-capitalist / free market economists like Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, and Milton Friedman kind of saw the Federal Reserve System of monetary policy and fractional reserve banking, the New Deal, Keynesian effective demand, and the robust regulatory system that came around labor after that to be kind of an encroachment on freedom and liberty. And they thought that it would inhibit the development and growth and prosperity that the free market would naturally come to itself, through seeking the most efficient production at the greatest profit, which they thought was like the magical mechanism of society, like the most socially beneficial mechanism is the free market. I would say like under anarcho-capitalism, the state's viewed really in a similar fashion to the way it is by traditional anarchists and communists. It's thought to be like a ruling class institution that maintains social and economic control of market actors and factors, and it has a monopoly on violence and coercion. Just the existence of the state is coercive on the truly free market, and the state forcibly extracts private property for its maintenance through taxation and, enforces regulations that hinder efficiency and mandate market interaction outside free association, which anarcho-capitalists think is kind of one of the fundaments of liberty and freedom as well. In their vision, kind of all government services are replaced by private business, which they think will be more cost effective because it strives for efficiency and quality to make greater profits. They believe in a form of like free market capitalism, like a pure form of free market capitalism that doesn't have any oversight, any regulation, any laws, or any state that keeps it in check. They also believe that this pure form of capitalism would be free from any sort of manipulation, any sort of monopoly, and any sort of crony capitalism. And this is the part that kind of conveniently makes a rhetorical loophole for ANCAPs, where any of the problems we have with capitalism, they can blame either on collectivism, on an interventionist state, or on crony capitalism. So all the defects are not part of pure capitalism. They're part of these aberrations to capitalism. And kind of like Jordan and I were discussing before the beginning of the show, this is kind of an interesting corollary to some of the leftists who say that actually existing communism was an aberration, and this pure form of communism that we've never achieved is really what we're aiming for. And I think it's important to think of both the left and right in these terms. And it's important to draw parallels between them to see how people can go from being a libertarian socialist to an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not a big believer in horseshoe theory, but I think there are some areas where thought overlaps like that. And it's important to note where people can ideologically cross over there.
Totally.
For me, that's kind of like the basics of anarcho-capitalism.
Do you want to keep going, or can I jump in and ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask a question.
Yeah.
Okay. So how the fuck is anarcho-capitalism supposed to create a system where there is no monopoly? Like, that seems like the logical conclusion to anarcho-capitalism and free markets. If you just let the market go and you don't have anyone else intervening and regulating, then you just the power with corporations will amass over time, and you'll just have these mega monopolies. Like, what is their logic for preventing that?
It's not even so much that it gets prevented. It's that there's they use rhetorical loopholes throughout this whole concept of anarcho-capitalism to kind of just delete the concept itself. Anarcho-capitalists differ from anarchists and leftists in that they don't believe in the labor theory of value. They developed their own theory of value, the price theory of value, or the speculative theory of value, which
you can negotiate your wage with your boss.
Yeah, because
it's a voluntary exchange.
Yeah. Well, and then that's the contractarian element, where you assume that all actors are on the same level and there's no coercion in engaging in contracts like that. But they believe, because of the way that prices work, that pure monopoly could not exist if there was no regulatory system to call it monopoly. That's like a central thesis of Rothbard.
There's just no one
sense, because if you're a capitalist, you want to fucking destroy your competition. Like, the point is to establish a monopoly.
The point is competition. The point is trying to get to the top of that competing hierarchy,
Yeah. And like I said, it's a rhetorical loophole. Monopoly, of course, can exist in any place where a firm dominates the production and distribution of a certain good or service. But it's the particular mechanism of pricing that ANCAPs use to say that that's not actually technical monopolism. But we're going to come to find out through the discussion that, all of the problems with anarcho-capitalism are dismissed through rhetorical technicalities like that.
I see.
Well, what about the term libertarianism? I think we should talk about that, because that's a term that's really washed down in the U.S. Right-wing libertarianism is an ideology that's almost exclusive to the U.S. Like, if you talk to politically educated people on an international scale, and you mention the word libertarianism, they're going to associate it with left-wing politics. They're not going to think of Murray Rothbard and ANCAPs. It's only in the United States since the 1980s that anarcho-capitalism and right-wing libertarianism has even been a fucking thing.
Well, I would argue that it's a little bit before that. Murray Rothbard started his work in economics in the 1940s, and he was the first person to use the term anarcho-capitalism, and that was
that far
right
back,
in the early 50s. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He used that in one of his first books after getting out of school in the 1950s. He was going to Columbia. He heard Ludwig von Mises speak from the University of Chicago, and he was bitten by the free market bug, and he transferred to the University of Chicago and, was fed all of this free market anti-collectivist stuff and became a zealot in that regard, and kind of took the views of Ludwig von Mises much further, kind of to their logical extremes.
I think this would be a good time to read that quote that you sent me from Rothbard.
Oh, I was even going to read a quote right now from Rothbard. It's probably the same goddamn thing.
Why don't you read yours?
Okay. Rothbard said, we are not anarchists, and those call us anarchists are not on firm etymological ground. Is that the same quote?
It's not the same quote, but that's a great one that I sent to C-Money shortly before the episode. He said himself, we are not anarchists.
Yeah. Lay that out at the get-go.
Yeah. Mine was going to be more about his logical extremes, where he said, in a perfect libertarian society, there would be a flourishing free market in children, and that parents had no obligation.
That's what I was going to read.
Children didn't starve.
Yep.
So just to see that, like,
slavery.
He had no. Yeah. I mean, it just shows how bold he was in his vision, that he'd have like total, complete disregard for any ethical concerns for the free market.
He called it a free baby market.
Essentially, yeah. He said a lot of horrible stuff about parents and children. What did he say? The parent should not have a legal obligation to feed, clothe, or educate his children, since such obligations would entail positive acts coerced upon the parent and depriving the parent of his rights.
Coercion, you have to take care of your kids.
In terms of your question, like asking about like the changing definition of the term libertarian, if we look back on anarchist philosopher Peter Kropotkin in The Conquest of Bread, he's the guy who coined the term libertarian socialist. And libertarianism and socialism were, from that point, fundamentally tied together and fundamentally a project of the left. And it was specifically Murray Rothbard who wanted to reappropriate the term libertarian for right libertarians, for free market libertarians. He really is the linchpin for this whole movement. You know, he took some thoughts that were coalescing around free market and anti-collectivist concerns from, Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, who are considered the Australian school of economists. And he kind of superpowered those into anarcho-capitalism. He synthesize that stuff with ideas from individualist anarchists like Lysander Spooner and Max Stirner as well, and also some what they'd call classical libertarian notions, which is kind of a confection itself. But he took all of those ideas and kind of mixed them together and came up with anarcho-capitalism. If you want to point at one person for this, it's Murray Rothbard. And he's an interesting, controversial, cantankerous character. Said a lot of horrible things, did some interesting things, had some really weird career turns in his life. Well worth at least taking a glance at his Wikipedia page. It's pretty long, pretty storied.
Yeah, so like one of the fundamental aspects of anarchism is we're opposed to all hierarchy. And capitalism is by definition a hierarchy, one of the most fucking brutal ones that have ever existed between workers and the owning class. So I don't even understand how they can justify how that's anarchism.
Rothbard defined his interpretation of anarchism as a system which provides no legal sanction for such aggression against person and property, and wrote that what anarchism proposes to do then is abolish the state, which is to abolish the regularized institution of aggressive coercion, which,
anarchism is when you can just do whatever the fuck you want.
Topically, it jives with the individualist anarchist interpretation, but I think generally it jives with how a lot of socialist anarchists see the state as kind of an oppressive, coercive mechanism.
I do see it that way.
But, the big difference is that anarchism fundamentally sees capitalism itself as enforcing hierarchy. There's the hierarchy of capital over labor that is economic exploitation, and he just did not see it like that. Because they didn't believe in the labor theory of value, they did not see capitalism as an exploitative force.
Well, is it just like a continuation of the modern argument that you see from people that defend capitalism, where they're just like, oh, well, if you don't like your boss, if you don't like where you work, you can just go somewhere else. It's just going to be fucking shitty over there too.
Yeah, it's interesting because they have this big focus on coercion, but only from certain points of view, from state coercion. Like private coercion seems to pass under the threshold.
Don't tread on me unless you're a corporation.
Well, if you've had the advantage to accumulate this property and this influence and this wealth under anarcho-capitalism, it's your prerogative to flex it. And, you can engage with me on a totally voluntary contractual basis if you want. And if you don't like the terms of the contract, you can fuck off and seek one somewhere else. And they see that as kind of an equal social interaction. Totally voluntaristic interaction. They don't see the coercion that like, I have to work to eat and you have all the money and you're offering me these terms and I can take those terms and eat or not take them and not eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think once again, it comes down to the people that are promoting this ideology. They think they're going to be the capitalists. They don't think they're going to be the people that are living on the streets starving. They don't think they're going to be peasant farmers.
Well, CEOs in waiting.
Yeah, like we discussed before the show, it's that notion that I'm the temporarily inconvenienced millionaire. Mm-hmm. I want the rules set up so that when I finally do get ahead, I'm going to dominate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling C-Money before we started recording, it's like this meme that I posted on my Instagram page where it's like, the boss tells you, just don't claim overtime. It's okay. And then the worker's like, you know what? Yeah, that's fine because one day I'll be the boss.
Oh my God, no.
It's just like putting on a full fucking clown makeup.
Yeah, seriously.
What do you guys think about this quote from Chomsky? He referred to right-wing libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism as, quote, an aberration, nearly unique to this country, a theory of a world built on hatred that would self-destruct in 3 seconds. End quote.
Yeah, that all fucking tracks for me. That you take this system to its logical conclusions and it is going to create a hellscape beyond the one that we've ever seen and beyond my imaginings, I feel like.
Right, and I frequently say, too, like the goal of capitalism is to get us back to feudalism. So I firmly see anarcho-capitalism as feudalism, like they're fucking equivalent.
Yeah.
I might disagree with you a little bit there.
Neo-feudalism.
I think neo-feudalism is one of those terms that's as incoherent as anarcho-capitalism. Feudalism required extra economic bonds. There was an aristocracy. There were serfs that were tied to the land, and these required bonds that were outside of economic means. And the only bonds in anarcho-capitalism are economic bonds. There are no extra economic bonds.
I see.
It is fundamentally different.
But as far as like the kinds of power structures that it would create over time, concentrating it into these little kingdoms, like corporate kingdoms, you have like this one like Amazon kingdom over here with their company town. And,
Yeah, and I definitely understand like the analogies and why people say corporate feudalism, neo-feudalism, things like that. But fundamentally at the bottom of this is profit accumulation and upward wealth transfer. And feudalism existed at a time before goods were produced for profit. Goods were produced for consumption at that point. You couldn't like kill 1 million fields and have like 1 million tons of hay because there just weren't enough people to buy it then. So accumulation didn't work like it does under capitalism. There were upper limits to it. You could only have so much cool stuff under feudalism.
I don't know why my mic stuff just screwed up. Hold on, let me get John for a second because it's just coming out of my laptop instead of through the mic. Hold on a sec, sorry.
Okay, no worries.
So I'm going to take a quick pee break.
Okay. So I was going to talk a little bit about anarcho-communism. Anarcho-communism is defined as a political philosophy that advocates for the abolition of the state, capitalism, wage labor, social hierarchies, and private property. And we also believe that all the goods ought to be held collectively by the communities and that workers should completely control the means of production. We're also largely guided from the Marxian principle, from each according to their ability to each according to their need, which I wanted to point out, because believe it or not, there actually is a lot of overlap between Marxian thought and anarchism, despite a lot of the contention that exists between the two schools of thought. It's the same goal. It's just different ways of getting there at the end of the day. So it's a classless, moneyless, stateless society.
I think this connection might be flaky.
Okay.
And we view the state apparatus differently depending on if you're a Marxist or an anarchist.
So sorry about that. I wasn't able to follow a lot of that just because I was trying to reconnect my microphone and stuff.
It's okay. I was just like breaking down anarcho-communism, like as opposed to anarcho-capitalism.
Oh shit. Well, I'm going to get that again later today. So
I guess C-Money, how do you see the main differences between anarcho-communism and anarcho-capitalism?
I mean, if I was going to talk about that, I'd want to kind of differentiate between a few things, because
we can go like term by term too, if that's easier to break things down.
You know, for me, there are kind of a few different schools of thought we're talking about here. We're talking about anarcho-capitalism, we're talking about anarchism, bar none, and some in-between concepts like minarchism. And anarcho-capitalism has some stuff in common with these and is against some other elements of these. So like I would say anarcho-capitalism does share ideas with both left and right theories of a minimal or totally absent centralized state. It rejects the state in all forms and seeks to liberate the individual from any form of coercion, but it also rejects labor theory of value that the liberal and socialist traditions are based on, and the anti-capitalist foundations of libertarian socialism. So anarchism is like literally without hierarchy. It's a political philosophy that interrogates all forms of authority to prove their legitimacy and rejects any coercive or involuntary forms of hierarchy. And it holds that capitalism is an inherently hierarchical relationship between capital and labor, and so it's incompatible with social and economic equality. I would contrast that with minarchism, which is the night watchman state, which means that it's minarchists argue for a minimalist form of government that only provides security against violence, which includes violence against private property, because these people see private property as an extension of the self. And we can get into the theory of that in a minute. I think that's important to talk about. So they think like military courts and police exist to enforce property rights and contracts and vitiate fraud and violence. I would say libertarian socialism is like an anti-authoritarian, anti-status philosophy within the socialist movement that rejects the state socialist conception of socialism. It rejects centralization of distribution and economic control. I would say anarcho-capitalists reject the libertarian socialist economic theories of anarchism, arguing that they're authoritarian or require authoritarianism to achieve, while they believe that there's no coercion under capitalism. They think capitalism without regulation is a totally voluntary set of interactions.
Fucking wild.
That's how I define those. It's like anarcho-capitalism kind of sits in a complementary and contrary place to all of the traditions that it draws from. And that's what makes it so problematic, and why there are so many rhetorical loopholes that are built into its foundational philosophy, is that it has to get out of all of these traps that it sets for itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Why do you think that it's so popular in the US? The ideology itself?
I think that there are a number of reasons that it's popular. I think it feeds into these ideas of like meritocracy and achievement and individual achievement. it feeds into a lot of the American mythos about like controlling your destiny and freedom and liberty. It's kind of like the utmost of those. And it, I feel like at some point in American history, we started to confuse like autonomy with liberty. We wanted to be able to do whatever we wanted without regard for everybody else socially. And this gives a lot of theoretical underpinning towards acting like a dick.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot of that right-wing libertarianism thought came from like the Manifest Destiny times. It came from people that thought that they could just take over land that belonged to indigenous communities for generations. And that spirit just continued later on into American history where, people just think it's their liberty and their self-determination.
Well, and a lot of that comes from, 18th century philosophers.
Yeah, like pioneers.
Mill and Stewart and those guys who believed, see if I can find my stuff here. They believed in the idea that if you mixed your labor with raw materials, that became your property, whether it was like land, wood, stone, whatever, and that became an extension of you. So your property was you. So anything that violated your property violated you. And, it gave kind of backwards justification to colonialism because although, say, the American Indians were here living, the land was undeveloped. They were savages. They didn't mix their labor with the land, so they didn't possess it. So when we came and made use of the land, we could possess it.
Yeah,
we being white people. I'm related
and property,
I'm a descendant of slave owners myself. So
and property rights didn't make any fucking sense to indigenous people at all because they had a completely separate set of beliefs. They didn't understand private property. And that's one thing that I wanted to have you talk about. Can you talk about the differences between like the three types of property? There's public, personal, and private. Can you talk about the three differences there?
Well, I mean, public property would be property that is held communally.
Like a park or something.
Yeah, in modern times, that would be like public spaces, like a park. But when you look at like pre-capitalist times, there were public lands where everybody had a little strip that they tilled. And, say like in England in the 16th century and 17th century, you had the enclosures that actually kicked people off the public lands. And then they had to rent lands in order to till from them, which reinforced the social bounds between kind of the aristocracy and the landowners and then the peasants. There was no more communal land at that time. In personal property, we're talking about like, this is my house, this is my hammer. When we're talking about private property, we're talking about like, I mix my labor with some other raw sort of material, and then it becomes an extension of me. And this comes from John Locke's philosophy in his Second Treatise of Government. He says, self-ownership allows a person the freedom to mix his or her labor with natural resources, converting common property into private property. And he concludes that people need to be able to protect the resources they're using to live on their property, and that's a natural right. And natural law, natural light is a fundament to this sort of anarcho-capitalist and libertarian thought system. Natural law, basically, according to natural law, all people have inherent rights, not conferred by legislation, but by God, nature, or reason. And there was a philosopher named Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century. Yeah. He really revised the concept of natural law to remove any notions of the promotion of the common good or perfection of nature that natural law had before that time. He argued that natural law arose because men had to join in society to get out of the war against every man. He was the guy who said, life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And so the only reason we engaged in society was kind of like a truce to stop killing each other so we could live less brutishly for a little bit. He kind of inverted the golden rule where he was like, don't do anything to anybody else that you wouldn't have done to yourself, which is a really...
Is that like the NAP?
I mean, it's related to that. That's the non-aggression principle, which is one of those huge ideological stakes of the libertarian movement. And it was described by Rothbard as a prohibition against the initiation of force or the threat of force against people, which he includes direct violence, assault, murder, or property, which he includes fraud, burglary, theft, and taxation. Taxation is theft to libertarians. And he thought that the non-aggression principle was derived from natural law, but that basically it extended the protections of natural law to private property. So it imbued personal property with these kind of other properties that the concept didn't have before that. So basically, if you violated my private property, I could initiate violence against you. You tend to think of like non-aggression principle, it's going to mitigate violence, where it's actually used as a justification for violence.
Mm-hmm.
I think on the left, a lot of times you hear people say property damage isn't violence. On the right, property damage is violence, and it is to be countered with violence, using the non-aggression principle as a justification for the violence. So that's another one of those rhetorical loopholes that sounds like it's one thing, but is really another that they use to justify this ridiculous belief system.
Right. Yeah. Can you brush on the tragedy of the commons? Because I think that ties into what you're saying as well.
Yeah.
And that's just real quick. Sorry. I just have to say, for the Cocktails and Capitalism podcast, this is also going to be the theme of the cocktail that will be, uploaded to Erika's show. So I just have to say that real quick before you break down into exactly what that is.
Yeah, well, the tragedy of the commons was kind of like a post hoc justification to use for things like the enclosures and taking away public lands. Tragedy of commons is a situation in which individual users who have open access to a resource, unhampered by shared social structures or formal rules that govern access and use, act independently according to their own self-interest, and contrary to the common good, cause depletion of the resource. So it's like, let's say we have like a public pond stocked with fish. Mm-hmm. And, different people go down there, they catch a few fish for fun, they catch some for meals, but I decide that every meal of mine is going to come from the pond, and I'm going to sell some of those fish that I catch. So I just go down there and I catch all the fish in the pond and deplete it. That is considered the tragedy of the commons.
Mm-hmm.
It's another one of those justifications that doesn't play out a lot in reality, but seems like a really good justification against holding assets in common.
Right. That makes sense.
And, it's tied to another concept that libertarians really stick to called tyranny of the majority.
Mm-hmm.
Which is related. It's defined as an inherent weakness in majority rule, which the majority of an electorate pursues exclusively its own objectives at the expense of minority factions. So it's like if a large group wants this particular benefit at the expense of a smaller group in society, it's coercive against that smaller group. But that smaller group, in the mind of libertarians and ANCAPs, is going to be the rich people who are the tax base. The rich people are the minority that are being put upon in this view. It turns class politics on its side.
I think what you're saying is this really just ties into what we were talking about before we started recording, which is just like when you look at utopian ANCAP artwork. You see like these mega tall skyscrapers. You see factories everywhere, cars. You don't see any greenery. You don't see any sustainability because they don't give a shit about that. They only care about things that are profitable. As opposed to like an ANCAP society, or an ANCOM society rather, I should say. You see a bunch of greenery, you see trains, you see all kinds of sophisticated technology that's sustainable. It's night and day, and I think that's just super fascinating.
Yeah, I've seen some critiques of ANCAP ideology that say that the ideal ANCAP society would look somewhat like Texas does now, but with a lot more shanty towns.
Yeah, I mean, ANCAP society, I think of like the Texas freeze, where you have a power grid that's disconnected from the rest of the countries, and you have people that literally freeze to death because of it.
Straight up.
Yeah, and really see, a lot of American history is just anarcho-capitalist. So I look at all of this as just worse than what we already have.
Well, yeah, I think if you want to look back on precedents for anarcho-capitalism, like the Wild West is really like one of the best examples of it that we have.
Right before the progressive era.
Yeah, where it's might makes right. Also, if you look back after the government of Somalia fell in the 90s, and then kind of all the warlord factionism that went on there, that would be definitionally anarcho-capitalist.
I've gotten into some debates with some ANCAPs, and it's funny, I actually mentioned Somalia. I'm like, oh, you want to go there? That sounds like a great place. Perfect anarcho-capitalist society. Yes, we were just talking about like environmentalism and how anarcho-communists differ with anarcho-capitalists. Anarcho-capitalists don't give a shit about the environment, obviously.
Well, they think that the market would be the best solution to it, that the market ensures efficiency in operation and maximization of profit, and that is the key to liberty. That's the key to getting the best services and the best goods is, competition based on profit seeking.
They must just think that resources are limitless and that we can just keep doing that. It's crazy.
Well, I think that they jive with that capitalist mentality of unlimited growth on a planet of limited resources, which is, I think, one of the fundamental problems with capitalism and the growth mentality.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, like in the early 1900s, you had people like John Muir, Gifford Pinchot, that were lobbying against Congress to set aside huge swaths of public lands, and they were laughed out of the room because they were full of members of Congress that were ANCAPs that were like, scenery? What the fuck?
Well,
why does that matter?
That gets back to those Lockean ideas about property, about private property, that it's like something you mix your labor with. This is this fundamentally capitalist idea that not being productive is an aberration, and that productivity should be rewarded, and that productivity is the ultimate goal, that producing things and accumulating profit is the ultimate goal of humanity. That they think that all of this stuff is for the betterment of humanity. ANCAPs see their project as bringing out the best in humanity. They don't see themselves as evil. They don't see themselves as calculating. They see it as the best way to achieve the most freedom for everyone. Like, they look at it as sincerely like a social project that's going to be beneficial. I know we look at them like they're ghouls, but I think it's important to see these people the way they see themselves, to understand where they're coming from and how they rationalize what they're doing. I mean, we obviously see it very differently, but nobody thinks of themselves, well, some people do, but most people don't think of themselves as evil or exploitive or manipulative. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to point out where these views are like that. So when you encounter someone who espouses these views, you can kind of point out these inconsistencies and hypocrisies.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be right back, guys. I'm going to grab some water.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, I kept thinking that, like, the real way to address some of these people with anarcho-capitalist views is to just use the Socratic method and keep asking them questions until they unravel their own arguments. Because so much of the time, all of the interviews that I've heard with people that actually identify as anarcho-capitalists, you just keep pressing on them with questions about, okay, so how would this work? How would this work? How would this work? And it just falls apart so fast.
Well, yeah, I think when you get down to the privatization of everything, but particularly like the privatization of services like the police, like the military, fire departments, infrastructure, things like that. I mean, if we all depended upon private security for everything, like who's to say where the jurisdictions are? This private security company that operates in this area might have a totally different set of rules from this security company that operates over here. And there's, a lot of interviewers did press Rothbard about that particular issue when he was around. And the answers he gave, I didn't really find satisfactory. He talked a lot about how there would be this nebulous kind of communally agreed upon set of natural laws and rights. And for a guy who was so adamantly against any sort of collectivism, any sort of like community oriented stuff, to still be promoting like mutualism without community, like I don't understand. I don't think it works. I don't think there's anything to understand there. I think that's one of like the fundamental inconsistencies of his view, is that he thought there would somehow be these like universally agreed upon rules that everybody went by, but then there are no other rules, and the enforcement mechanism is only private hired security.
Yeah, that part blows my mind. The idea of just private company. I mean, we already have this to a large extent, private companies hiring their own security forces. But if you had, I mean, and even the origin of police forces.
Yes, I was going to bring that up. I'm so fucking glad you're covering that.
Yeah, even the origin of police forces is, the need for different companies to protect their property. So then they started to hire different guards for that. So, I don't understand how you can imagine a situation where that you can just defer everything to any kind of like dispute to corporate police forces, because then you just have totally corporate turf wars between different companies. And where does the little guy get left in that? Like they just get crushed, or they get, employed by these defense forces and killed in these wars,
Yeah. And, I think another intractable problem with anarcho-communism is the idea of infrastructure, just like roads and bridges and things like that. Yeah. I mean, if these are all built by private companies and it's, capitalists who have the means to put it together, like the roads in my area of influence where I'm a powerful capitalist might be a lot better than the roads where you're a powerful capitalist, because I'm comparatively a much more powerful capitalist, but I'm only concerned with the roads being drivable up to the edge of my influence, which is like the edge of your territory. Like it just makes so much infrastructural inconsistency that to think that you'd have like a working economy of any sort that is so balkanized in every respect is just absurd. It's like these are the people who think that like the Federal Reserve is an aberration and that we need to go back to the time where banks all issued their own currencies. And,
we have op-eds coming out now and say we need to bring back company towns.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
And I mean, with crypto, you start seeing the whole like unregulated bank issued currencies. Yeah. And we came up with the Federal Reserve so we could use the same dollar from, New York to LA without seeing if this bank had an agreement with that bank, or if this dollar of gold was actually worth that dollar of gold issued by that other bank if they had the reserves to back it up. Like, that's how you get a stable economy. That's how you get distribution of goods and services over such a wide range, is that this stuff is standardized and centralized and regulated, at least to a certain extent. And I think it's just bizarre to see this modern push towards decentralization and deregulation in an economy that was only built on the benefits of centralization and regulation.
Good point. Yeah, it's fucking crazy. I don't know. I didn't really have much else prepared to talk about. Erika, do you have anything you want to add right now?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few things that I definitely want to hit on when we record later, but so you guys touched on how anarchists typically have some pretty environmentally friendly views versus anarcho-capitalists, versus these more right-leaning ideologies. I struggle with anarchism because I worry that we are dealing with climate change, which is a global problem that needs a globally coordinated response. And for me, anarchism sounds practical and feasible on the small scale, which is, I think, how societies would function more effectively, have more accountability.
Yeah.
There'd be so much more holding us together as communities if we were operating that way. But when we have like a global problem like climate change that is crushing down on us, and we need to mobilize globally for that. Do you guys see a way for anarchism to do that?
I think a bunch of steps would have to be taken before that. So
yeah,
a lot of anarchists may disagree with me on this, but I think personally the first step for getting to a point where we can at least address the ecological crisis is getting to a point where we nationalize all energy. So we nationalize the entire sector. And even though that is a government takeover, and that's not what anarchists would want, you would want to make it to eventually where workers who are inside those agencies would ultimately take over them. And then we have something that leads more towards an anarcho-communist route. But a lot of steps are going to be needed to be taken. We're going to need to work with governments. We're going to need to work with other countries. This isn't going to be something that can ever be accomplished on an individual level. Sorry, I have a shitload of background noise.
Yeah, that's okay.
But yeah, we're going to have to work together as a world. I don't see how we could just abolish the state right away and that's going to solve climate change. It won't.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, my thought on it is in the West and in the U.S. in particular, we have maybe a special definition of anarchism that a lot of other anarchists in other parts of the world in the global South don't share. Our view, the general anarchist view in the U.S. tends to be highly individualized. I think of it as lifestyle anarchism, or a justification of hedonism, or the same sort of just complete autonomist fetish that right libertarians have, where I don't owe anything to society and nobody can tell me what to do. And that's kind of the entire philosophy. And
that's a great point, because anarchism is supposed to be about community. It is supposed to be collective.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I think it's important when considering anarcho-capitalism to realize that the anarcho part that Rothbard took was from highly individualized Western anarchists. And that, even in the European West, European anarchists generally, as a rule, have kind of a more communal conception of anarchism than American anarchists. And I think that, part of that communal conception is the whole idea that hierarchy and authority needs to be justified. Not that it can't exist at all. In American individual anarchism, authority can't exist at all. Hierarchy can't exist at all. Everything has to be horizontal and decentralized. Where in more European and global Southern style anarchism that is more communal, hierarchy can be justified. It can be legitimized. It can be used organizationally in beneficial ways. But it has to continually justify itself. And then when it's no longer justified, it has to be abolished or moved on.
Dismantled.
And I feel like these are kind of like fundamental theoretical differences that American anarchists would be good to consider in their approach to their politics.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. That's
Totally.
extremely important.
Yeah. I mean, and that is.
I just think we could build organizations that are international, that do have a hierarchy, that do address these issues in the way that only systematic organization can, and then dismantle them when we're done.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. I have a huge problem with anarchists that just cling to ideological purity, where there are great opportunities to immediately improve the material conditions of people's lives, but they shit on those ideas
Throw them out.
if they're like state sponsored because they don't go with their particular flavor of anarchism, or they're like, oh, well, that's government, that's hierarchy. I'm like, but isn't the entire purpose of anarchism to immediately improve people's lives and constantly work towards abolishing oppression and abolishing inequality?
Well, I think this is like just part of people taking on like political points of view altogether in the modern age, is that they read the essence of the theory and they think you can only believe that there is no compromise, that any compromise is opportunism or collaboration with the enemy.
Yeah.
And I think in the real world, shit doesn't work like that.
It's like that joke that I was telling you about, Erika, the other day when we were talking with Desmond. The right wing's always like, the left is doing this, the left's doing that. And then we're just like, bitch, the left is too busy fighting itself.
Yeah, totally. I know. I mean, like, that's exactly what I thought of when you're talking about ideological purity. Like, we have an ideological purity problem on the left where everyone on their tiny little, like, minutely different sects.
Jerking off to our theory.
Yeah. And like, okay, everything, 99.9% of everything I believe overlaps with the person next to me. And we could be organizing a labor union. We could be like the fucking ALU over there that are like putting aside their differences and organizing for well-being. But we're too stuck on our little tiny ideological things that we are so fixated on in our identities that we can't see beyond those things. And that's one of the things that kind of drove me away from a lot of the activists that I was working with and frustrated me about the activist scene on the West Coast. But yeah, it's a big problem that needs to be addressed. And I think it's a problem that cuts to the core of, kind of why some anarchism makes sense to me and some anarchism doesn't, because some of it is so individualistic and so like, I've got mine and that's all that matters. And some of it is all about mutual aid and collectivity and community. And that's where I'm at, Yeah,
I despise individualistic anarchism. And I think hyper-individualism is one of the most toxic traits of United States culture.
Absolutely.
It is. But I think it, at least on the left, it's kind of an artifact of how utterly powerless the left has been. Like, we stopped calling the left in the U.S. We made the Democrats the left because the actual left was so marginalized and so ineffective as to not have any influence. So I think that it made people on the left start to cling to more pure and idealistic notions, and to become more performative about their morals and convictions, because we've been so utterly powerless politically that it's just been about performing your morals. And that's how we get things like cancel culture, call-out culture, and stuff like that, is that we don't have political influence, so we're just going to make it like a social thing.
Yeah. Totally. That resonates so hard. All of that. Goddamn.
Yeah, we need to do a lot better as leftists.
Yeah, and just like be nice to each other, guys.
I know, and the more conversations that I actually have with people that are not anarchists, that are like Marxists and democratic socialists, etc. We, like you said, Erika, we agree on 99.9% of things.
Yeah.
I'm not. When I talk to people on the left, we're not like having heated arguments.
Yeah, and just taking big dumps on each other for the difference. I mean, sometimes that happens. I see a lot of that online, but no.
I think so much of that is constrained to online, though. I think,
especially Twitter. Like Twitter is full of non-political normies, like
that have political views.
I know.
Yeah, but I think in the real world. In the real world, you see, like, on the right, they have their big tent philosophy, which allows for, like, neocons to mingle with QAnon people, with paleocons, with libertarians, with ANCAPs, because they've all agreed on kind of a broad goal.
Yeah.
Where I don't think we've quite reached that on the left yet. I think we're still hurt from being utterly shut out of politics to kind of see what we have in common and what kind of goals we can agree on rather than disagree about.
Yeah.
I think
we've also been targeted and infiltrated and, crushed by... Murdered, by the FBI, COINTELPRO, different, government programs to target leftists in the U.S. So we've been scattered, and our leftist movement has been dissolved deliberately. So it just sucks that like we're still struggling with just like getting along with the people that are still there and still trying,
Yeah, and I think on top of that, you have like the liberals who claim the mantle of the left when it's convenient, and then blame the left whenever they lose anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fucking Nancy Pelosi recently, she was like, "Oh, it was the left's fault. They didn't want me to be speaker. They wanted to be the queen bee."
It's the powerful left's fault.
I don't know how she figures out ways to make herself more unlikable.
Oh God, yeah.
It's kind of impressive.
I mean, all of the major Democratic politicians right now, I'm just mind blown by like how much they're fucking it up for every leftist cause that they could possibly be furthering.
Don't even get me fucking started on Joe Biden refusing to cancel student debt just so he can hold it over our heads at the goddamn midterms.
Ugh. I mean, God, we would do so much better at the midterms if he just did something, anything, one fucking thing for leftist issues.
I have a little bit of theory about that. I was telling you a little bit about it the other day, Jordan, just that like, it was like George W. really kind of expanded the power of the unitary executive, like executive orders, just issuing those. And then Obama really expanded on executive orders. He was like a genius with that shit. Mm-hmm. Trump did use them, not to the extent of either of those guys, but to me, it's just weird that Joe, who is like a career inside track bureaucrat, who has been there forever, doesn't want to use the power of the unitary executive. It's like,
that's really what it would make him more popular.
Yeah. Well, it's like your previous boss built that for you to do this with, and he did it because the Tea Party was so intransigent that he could not get any of his legislative agenda through. So he expanded the power of the unitary executive and ruled by EO. But I think that Joe may have some plans up his sleeves. I don't want to accuse him of being smart or calculating or anything like that. But I don't think people get into those positions of power without some sort of foresight into the political process.
And he's got some really sophisticated advisors.
Well, last year, his administration commissioned a paper from, I think it was the Congressional Budget Office, about how it would be feasible to erase student debt by executive order. And they issued an opinion, and right as it got issued, a bunch of journalists put out an FOIA on it because they wanted to see what it was about, and the entire document was redacted. Like it was only like the address and the letterhead at the top that they left on it. So there's some real good shit in there.
Yeah.
But they've been kicking the can down the road with this student loan stuff, like postponing it. Now it's out to August. My personal prediction is that they know the American political mind has the memory retention of a goldfish.
So they're doing it right before?
Yeah, if they were to do something right now, we're going to forget about it because like,
it's true.
Whatever the new outrage is on the right will have taken over by then. So he's going to wait until the very last minute before midterms, do an EO on student loan and be like, see, I did it.
You should be advising the president.
I mean, I think it would be really smart of him to do that, considering that every hourly wage earner in America now makes less because of inflation. Inflation has outstripped wages. If you get paid hourly, you now make less money under Joe Biden.
I haven't gotten a raise in 3 years.
God damn it.
Even if you had, it would be outstripped by inflation. You would still be poorer.
Right. Like my dad makes decent money. He just got a raise, but it still doesn't keep up with inflation. They give him like a 4% raise, and what inflation's like 8%.
Yeah, and gas has outstripped inflation itself.
Yeah.
So almost every wage earning American makes less under Joe than they did under Donald Trump, and that doesn't look very good for Joe.
No, and I just saw a statistic that said for you to live your exact same lifestyle that you lived in 2021, you would have to make $5,200 more dollars.
Yeah, I saw that same one. It's really depressing.
Wow.
It's okay because everybody was doing well before the pandemic, right?
Everything was perfect up until then.
Shitload of savings, jobs were great.
Is there late stage capitalism under anarcho-capitalism? Do they believe in that shit? Or do they just think capitalism is going to last forever?
They believe in some of the affects of it, like they think with a state apparatus that monopoly capitalism exists. They think without the state, monopoly doesn't exist, that's kind of the magic thing. But they do believe in the vagaries of monopoly capitalism. They do believe that crony capitalism exists. So it's another one of those things where they try to kind of have their feet on both sides and end up in neither place, where it's just those rhetorical loopholes to try to hold on to this really untenable belief system.
Guys, I feel like we didn't do nearly as much like just being ruthless and mean.
I wanted to be more ideological.
It's good. I'm so glad. But also, I was just expecting this to be like a shit talking fest where we're just like, what the fuck, guys?
Destroyed with logic.
Destroyed with logic. Get out of here, Ancaps.
Well, you know that does bring up another sort of interesting point about the fundamentals of anarcho-capitalist ideology.
Yeah.
And the economists behind it. Like when we think of economists, we think of people who rely on math, rely on formulas, rely on empirical data, and that they're pulling all of their results from numbers that cannot be contested. But really, like, the fundament of this school of thought is this idea called praxeology, which is a theory of human action. It's based on the notion that humans engage in purposeful behavior as opposed to reflexive behavior and other unintentional behavior. Praxeology is deductive, not inductive. It doesn't use any empirical data to determine economic principles. So what this means is there are no studies and no data to back up what they're saying. They're economists with no numbers. They specifically reject the scientific method and econometrics. There are a lot of economic theories out there that make social conjecture.
Well, and that's why the right is so united, because they don't give a shit about data and statistics.
But
actively against it.
Yeah, I just feel like we're brought up to think that economics is a science. It's an ideology.
Yeah, totally. Totally. That's so fucking true.
Yeah, and
that's
anarcho-capitalism
complicated.
Yeah. Well, in all of these guys who are at the front of these schools of thought, von Mises, Hayek, Friedman, Rothbard, James Buchanan. I've read books by all of these schools. I've spent some quality time punching myself in the brain. There is not a lick of math in any of them. There are no formulas in any of them. And I'm a math dude. I was hoping for some of that shit to see, like, how can you empirically justify this? And it's deductive reasoning. It's bullshit. This is the way people are supposed to behave. So we're going to base all of our theory on this.
Prescriptive versus descriptive.
Well, and anything that is like counterfactual to what they think is an externality. And like an externality in economics is basically like a factor that's extraneous to calculating profit.
Like climate change.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, to me, this is like just the big Achilles heel of anarcho-capitalism is there's nothing scientific underneath it. And, as those of us who have read Marx and consider ourselves Marxists, we know Marxism is kind of a misnomer for scientific socialism. Like, you don't need a moral basis to believe the economic conclusions that Marx came to about, the falling rate of profit, the labor theory of value, and what economic exploitation is, just in terms of surplus value. Like, there's nothing deductive about any of that. It's just numbers that you can plug in. And I feel like, the left gets smeared as being emotional and not having reason, not expressing logic a lot of the time, being hard on the sleeve, social justice warriors, all that same bullshit we've heard. And really, in this case, it's the other way around. It's totally the other way around. These guys are saying, my feelings feel like this. So my theory justifies my feelings in this way.
Yeah.
So, much like the right does all the time, they're accusing the left of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Projection.
All that projection. Yeah. Jinx. On a slightly related note, I just shared today on the Cocktails and Capitalism page an article from The Atlantic where they're talking about how the title is, "Even My Business School Students Have Doubts About Capitalism." And the heading is a generation raised amid major economic turmoil needs more reassurance that an open economy won't leave people and communities behind. But just the fact that even econ students, who are the most indoctrinated bunch in academia, the most indoctrinated with not science, but ideology, complete pure ideology, even they are saying, no, this ideology that we've been fed our whole lives isn't working for a lot of people. That gives me some hope. It also gives me a lot of despair. So
I definitely got some hope from that. In my reading over the years on this, it's just been made apparent how every university economics department, every university business department is filled with these ghouls, these guys who have been filled with this profit-seeking, rent-seeking ideology from the get-go. And to hear that, even the kids now who have been prepped with that to go into this school are seeing that is not panning out in reality.
Fuck
yeah. Well, that's the thing. As much as the right likes to say it, now it's our turn to say it. Fuck your feelings. Look at reality. Fuck your feelings.
The world is burning. People are getting poor. How's your bank account doing, everyone out there? How do you like this late-stage capitalism?
But yeah, I think it's definitely an inflection point for the anarcho-capitalists when reality starts disagreeing with their perception of it so much that their own zealots are calling it into question.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's fucking great.
Well, I feel like, Jordan, are there any I feel like you are ready to dunk on some anarcho-capitalists really hard. Did you have other points that you didn't get to make about how this is just blatantly absurd?
I mean, it doesn't make any fucking sense. When I was texting you, on Instagram, and I was like, libertarian, anarcho-capitalism is just fucking like you can sell your kid for 8 Bitcoin. Like you can just do whatever you want. It's just an evil, warped ideology that I don't even understand, like how people could possibly think this could work.
God damn it. Yeah.
Sorry, I tripped over my words a little bit there.
No, that was great. I mean, I don't know. And just the idea that like everything is property, even myself, I am my own property and I can sell myself and then I have no property. Like what the fuck? I don't know.
Well, just
so many things like
that.
that.
They can just like straight up tell you, oh, it's voluntary exchange because you can just negotiate your wage with your boss. It's it's simple, man.
So yeah,
that goes back to those like ideological economic precepts that they have. Much like counterfactuals end up being externalities, like, oh, well, we're just not going to take that into account when we're calculating this thing because, the amount of dead birds by the smokestack doesn't matter. Where was I going with this?
Do that all the time.
Yeah, same. I was like,
just that like, oh, fuck. Yeah, I got a little stoned before we did this, and I lost my spot on my page.
Wow, you were stoned? You were like so fucking on point, dude.
I know, couldn't even
do that.
I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff.
C-Money's 10% is me at fucking 98.
Oh my god, yeah, I'm always firing it on all cylinders.
Dude runs circles around me intellectually. I only hope to be on his level when I'm at his age.
I gotta say, like. For me, it was a long time coming. I'm a slow learner. I'm a late bloomer with that stuff. Like, I started reading Marx in my 30s.
Wow, nice.
For me, I just found like I had worked so many jobs and just like I had no inclination to work my way up at any of them. I always hated my bosses. I always felt like I want to do the bare minimum possible and I want to find every way to get around doing stuff. And for a long time, I just thought that like there was something wrong with me, that I was like lazy or unproductive or not industrious. And then I just realized that capitalism fucking sucks. And I didn't want to spend my time making more money for someone else than I do myself. But, I just didn't have the language for it until I read some Marx. And I did the David Harvey Capital course. It took me like 6 months to read Capital and like really understand it. But then like once I did, it was like everything became apparent. It was like the veil was lifted. And I was like, I'm not lazy. I just don't want to be someone else's slave.
Yeah. That's a good way to sum it up.
It's like poverty, racism, imperialism, all that stuff really sucks, but at least I have an iPhone and I can go to McDonald's. Like, that's how these clowns sound to me.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And then like to be an anarcho-capitalist and just like, it's so hard for me to get into that mindset that would make a better world for people, that would be a better, like a more beautiful existence. Like it just sounds like the worst nightmare I've ever dreamed up.
I pay Costco like $700 a month to provide security for me.
Oh God! Oh wait, I don't have the gold plan, so they're not gonna show up.
They're only gonna send like one officer out. They might. They're gonna ask me how much my house is worth first, and then they might come. Do you have any farmland available?
Just to think that like big corporations who amass power, that it's not like coercive power that they're using over people is just, I cannot with my brain wrap around that,
I saw a really funny one today. It's like all the like Blue Lives Matter people that have the Punisher sticker.
Oh my God.
And they're always like these same group of conservatives are always shitting on Disney, right, for being too woke, not realizing that Disney is the company that owns the Punisher. And not only that, the Punisher literally kills cops.
Yeah, I know that was what I was thinking. Like, damn it, that's so
And then like Walt Disney was like pro-Nazi and like a Holocaust denier.
Yeah, hardcore anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Yeah. God.
And I saw that like they're like, oh, boycott Disney, go to Dollywood. And it's like, have you ever read anything about Dolly Parton?
Like, do they not fucking understand that all these companies want to do is make money? Like, they don't give a shit about actually being woke or advancing LGBTQ issues or any of this? Like, do they not get that?
Yeah, and it's like, and if the basic premise that everything is built around is that under capitalism, people are working for their own self-interests and that's going to create a good world, do you really think that all of the self-interests of all these corporations that amass power and wealth are really, I mean, that is not going to be good for you. It's not going to work well for the little guy. They won't give you, access to the well that they took over. They won't give you, access to any of the resources that they've completely dominated. They will fuck you over every chance they get.
You know what I think of when I think of like an ANCAP society? I honestly think of the movie The Lorax.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I've never seen that one.
Everything is being bought up and
they chop down the last tree. They cut down all the trees and everything's just factories. And then interestingly enough, I don't know if you guys knew this, the person who the Lorax is modeled after was Gifford Pinchot, who was the first U.S. Forest Service. I can't think of the name of the exact position right now, but they were the head of the Forest Service, the first one. I think it might have been commissioner.
What? That's fucking wild. I won't tell that story now. That's crazy.
Yeah, if you look at the character and then you look at pictures of Gifford Pinchot, he's got like the same mustache and everything.
Wow. How funny.
Interestingly enough, too, about Pinchot, he was a class trader. His parents made a bunch of money in the timber industry, actually cutting down forests. And he saw firsthand the impact that was doing for the environment and spent the rest of his life fighting to save forests.
Oh my God, I really want to tell that story now. I've got to read about this.
And he also founded the Yale School of Forestry.
Wow, that's fucking dope.
But yeah, you guys want to plug your shit real quick? C-Money, you can go first. How can people get in contact with you? Talk a little bit more about Trickle Down Socialism and all that good stuff.
Sure. My primary internet presence is just on Twitter. It's at Cmoney Burns, CMoneyBurns. I talk about politics, music, and lots of other stuff on there, kind of a mishmash of all my stuff. But for my podcast, my main podcast is Trickle Down Socialism. You can find us on all the major streaming services, and we just try to cover how, our system is set up for socialism for the rich and ragged individualism for the rest of us. And we try to interview academics, politicians, activists, artists from a leftist point of view, just kind of talking about different stuff to do with socialism and how to bring it to the people.
So fucking cool. Hell yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Erika, how can people get in touch with you and tell the listeners a little bit more about Cocktails and Capitalism?
Yeah, totally. So you can find Cocktails and Capitalism on Instagram and on Twitter. We're at Cocktails and Capitalism spelled out on Instagram, and then at Cocked Capitalism on Twitter. So the show, I guess the byline for it is we're a podcast that shit, I just blanked on it. We're a podcast that pairs crafted beverages with stories distilled from our capitalist hellscape. So we're really trying to both entertain, present stories that are compelling and entertaining and illuminating, and educate people at the same time about different political ideologies, different different amazing activism that people are doing, different, political, what else? I'm just like spacing here. We just cover a bunch of stories. We cover, sorry, I'm just fucking this. Every time I do like intros and things like this, I like butcher it.
It's okay. Like, I always fucking trip over my words too. I'm like, what am I even saying right now? What the fuck am I talking about?
Especially when I'm plugging things, I'm like, oh God, I gotta do this right. And then it just all goes out the window. But yeah, I mean, we basically, I've been talking with a lot of people that are doing anti-capitalist work, people who are, producing anti-capitalist music or organizing. Right now I'm in touch with some of the Amazon Labor Union members who are going to come on the show and talk about how they achieved this win. So I'm really excited about that.
Hell yeah. That's sick.
So, yeah, I'm stoked about it. I'm so pumped for everything they've accomplished. But yeah, so if you guys want to listen, you can find us on Spotify, on Google, on Apple, all the major podcasting platforms. It's just Cocktails and Capitalism.
For sure. Thank you so much. 805 Uncensored is on all the major social media platforms. Kind of getting popular on Twitter right now. I'm trying to build up my Instagram feed, so if you guys want to follow me on Instagram at 805 Uncensored Pod, I'd really appreciate that. You can find me on YouTube, and if you have a guest suggestion or you would like to send me a question, you can email me 805uncensored@gmail.com, and that's it. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your night.